In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord our God, as we gather this afternoon, we thank you for this gift of the day, a beautiful day, a little chilly, but beautiful. We thank you in a special way for the gift of our lives, the gift of our faith, our respective vocations, and the people that we serve in the various parishes throughout the diocese. We ask that you open our minds and our hearts to what is presented this afternoon, that it might enrich our own lives, but ultimately enrich the lives of the people who work for the church, so that they might come to a better appreciation and understanding of their roles, responsibilities, and their rights and their duties. We ask your blessing upon the presenters and all of us gathered here this day. We pray this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. So before I turn it over, just so you know that this went through a lot of process. There was a pastor's committee that reviewed this whole thing initially. It went through various consultative bodies within the diocese. So it's sort of a labor of love, but it was a long labor. So hopefully it will be enlightening this afternoon and help you in your responsibilities as pastors and parish administrators, as well as business managers of the respective parishes. Maureen is first up.
Thank you. And just to echo what Father Gate just said, it has been a long process, and many people in this room have been part of that process. And I can't thank you enough for your wisdom, your willingness to help, your support. We have worked with business managers, pastors. We have worked certainly with the wonderful support of good Catholic lawyers out there who help Rita and me put this whole thing together. So a huge thank you to all of those whose fingers touched this project. And a special thank you to the vicars who were supportive throughout and with whom the bishop collaborated on this project. So truly it is part of keeping this church, making this church alive. And so we're very pleased and privileged to bring this to you today. Those of you, we're assuming everyone got everything on the internet. If you did not, do see us after the presentation, because we are informed that some people, some of the computers may have knocked off like the template, the big important document, because perhaps you could not receive that big of a document. If that is the case, see us afterwards. We'll arrange that you get a copy of everything here. But I want to set the stage for this entire outreach effort. As Father alluded to, we have been dealing with this for quite a long time. Rita Joyce and I began with the process of developing a parish personnel manual, a pastoral staff personnel manual a few years back. And it went through a lot of collaborative processes too, and eventually the bishop adopted it in 2011. This parish personnel manual is designed in that context, so it is quite similar to what the pastoral staff has, and with a few updates here and there and a few special clauses, as we will talk about later. But both the pastoral staff manual as well as this parish personnel template are designed really with two goals in mind. The first goal is the goal of our Catholic social teachings that view the integrity of the individual as so valuable, and the respect we have for each other as so valuable. And so it was thought that what we really needed was something in writing that reflected not only duties and obligations and responsibilities, but rights and privileges and respect. So this manual is an attempt to reflect that part of our life called Catholic social teachings. The second goal is something that we also experienced at the pastoral staff, but certainly is something that reflected most sincere requests we got from many, many pastors. And that was some help in putting a manual together that not only reflected the law or reflected what the diocesan policy was, but also reflected what best practices were. Many priests said, I was trained to do X. I wasn't really trained to be a human resource manager, but that's what I have to do. And I'm willing to do it, but give me some guidance here. So we've really attempted to do that with this manual. The other thing, though, also is the request by pastors who said, I move from parish to parish, and it's a different story in each parish I go into. So it would be nice to have a predictability of expectations, not only for me, the pastor, but for the people with whom I work. So those are the contexts or the goals that a template like this is designed to achieve. So with that, I will turn over to Rita. We do this back and forth so you don't get bored with the same voice all the time. So we try to just go back and forth so we keep everyone alive and awake.
Okay. It's my role to tell you a little bit about what you received in the email, and I'll just touch on them briefly, and then we'll go through in a little more detail what it is that you have in your packet. But mainly, the most important part of the email was that we produced for you a template, and it is just that. It is not a policy that we're giving to you and saying, you must adopt this. This is mandatory. That's not the case at all. We have given you a model. We've given you a form that you can work with and that you can put the best practices that you choose to apply in your manual. You can also put what is suitable to your parish. As Father Gay started out the presentation, he said we're all different, and that we recognize. We have 200 parishes in the Diocese of Pittsburgh. Some are very complex. Some have multiple sites, some have school buildings, some have active schools, some have schools that are now used for religious education purposes. Some have staffs that have youth ministers, pastoral ministers, social ministers, religious education directors or coordinators, and some have a parish secretary. So we realize that not one size is ever going to fit all, so we don't propose to produce for you a document that fits all. We've given you a model, a sample, and from that sample, you're to use whatever is appropriate for your particular circumstances. What you received in the packet, in addition to the template, was items that we considered by law mandatory. And there you will see, today you received those also. Did you receive those? No. You received the decision-making chart. You didn't receive what was mandatory. Yes, you did.
Yeah. Here we go. These are the things.
Okay.
So you can just
All
go
right.
through this.
What you've received, in addition to the template, are the directions for pastors, and it's a step-by-step process by which we hope that you can make choices as you go along in this process. We don't expect that you necessarily will do it yourself. You may delegate this to one of your staff, to your business manager, to your secretary, to your social minister, to whomever the person is in your parish that is most appropriate to do this. However, this can't be done, this shouldn't be done, let me paraphrase, this shouldn't be done in a vacuum. You need to consult. Just as we went through an extensive process of consulting where we thought, okay, this is what we're going to tell you. This is what we're going to tell each of the parishes. And then the vicars became involved in saying, well, that's just not what we think you ought to do. You ought to talk to different pastors. You have to get the feel for what the diocese is like in each and every part of the diocese, in each one of the 6 counties. So we did have this pastors group that worked with us and gave us some appropriate consultation. Now, what you'll see in the directions for pastors is the step-by-step of what you need to do. You need to review the chart entitled requirements and best practices. When you see the requirements and best practices, it tells you basically, we're suggesting to you as the diocesan attorney and the associate general secretary, but also an attorney affiliated with our office for special projects, that these are the elements of the law that you need to put into place in order to have a document that is a document that your employees can trust and that is not going to get you into any kind of legal hot water. These are the things that you need to put in, the mandatory sections. But then there's a section called best practices. As Maureen stated, many of you have told us through the years, this is not your forte. This is not what you were ordained for. You don't necessarily know what is the cutting edge in business. What are the appropriate practices? We've attempted to give you a set of best practices with our recommendations. And we've attempted to help you along with this by a decision-making chart. Now, you will have in your packets a decision-making chart, and we're going to work through that today. That's the chart that is like a grid. It's line by lines called decision-making chart. And this is a 4-page document that really tells you these are the best practices. Refer to the template because it's going to give you a big explanation of why we thought that was the best practice or why we know it's the best practice and we're suggesting that you adopt it. Or this is the state of Pennsylvania law, therefore you need to adopt it. But the choice is going to be yours. We're not giving you the manual and saying to you, this is what you must do. We're saying you need to make the choices. So the first few pages are the choices. The next 2 pages are appropriately the instructions of the decisions that you have to make. They're your decision-making chart relative to where you have to fill in the differences. And we'll walk through that hand in hand with you. But as we proceed through this whole process, there is a timeline that you need to be aware of. The 5th anniversary of the vicariates is October the 1st of 2014. That is the target deadline by which Bishop Zubik has indicated all parishes are to adopt a personnel manual. So you are to have this manual in place. We have attempted to give you all the tools to make that a pretty simple process for you. And the simplest of process is that on the decision-making chart, you make your decisions appropriately and then begin to input them into the computer. Now, if you need some assistance with that, we do have assistance available for a period of time. And we're going to suggest to you that that assistance can be available to you up until June 30. And that June 30 is our suggested timeline to have this wrapped up. As you get into the summer, there are many other parish projects that go on. We understand that Lent is a week and 2 days away. We understand that there are a lot of demands on the parish and upon your schedules, but we're saying to you, we can provide to you hand-holding. In other words, we can provide for you the assistance of an employee in the diocese who will work with you by taking your decision-making chart and inputting it into a template, sending you back the template, saying, Father, look it over. If it's okay, or if we don't hear from you in 2 weeks, then we're going to presume it's okay. Here's your template. Here's your manual. But that service is only going to be available no later than June 30th, and we're hoping that it's available up until June 30th. But we will do our best. Maureen and I will do our best to help you with any kinds of technical questions that you have relative to what goes into the manual. We'll help you with the law. We'll help you with best practices. What the diocesan staff who will do the inputting, and that's Christine Radcliffe, what Christine Radcliffe will help you with is the technicality of putting it into a document. So don't expect that Christine will be able to answer a question for you relative to best practice. She's not going to be able to do that. She is going to do the mechanics with you if you need her to do that. But we will do the legal advice if you should also need that. Okay, I now turn it back to Maureen for her section. Oh, I'm sorry. I took Maureen's section on Christine, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Christine works with me. Chris has volunteered to do this, and yet she has another wonderful opportunity to do something else. And so we're trying to manage this all, but she's still wanting to very much help. And just to be real clear with what Rita was saying, this takes a huge burden off of many in the parish staff to have to put together the manual. She knows where the spots are that need the fill in the blanks or the choices, and really can be a great assistance. And then she will keep a directory full of your templates, so will also provide us that support so that we have that information for you in a separate directory. We have all the parish personnel manuals there. Now, moving on to the next thing, one might say with all of this, my glory, who makes the decisions here? Well, the pastor makes the decisions here. The pastor will, of course, consult with the various people within his parish that are necessary on the issues that are presented. But the pastor ultimately makes the decisions here. The bishop wants to make it very clear that no matter what, unless there are contracts, all employees are employees at will. Now, in Pennsylvania, that means there is an ability of the pastor to hire and fire at will, but also the employee to be employed or not employed at will. And so that is a concept underlying this entire manual, not uncommon at all in not only the Catholic community, but the outside world. Secondly, there are contracts that a few who provide services to the parishes still enjoy. A principal has a contract, for example, for a grade school. Some of the social ministers have contracts. But for the most, unless there are contracts, this manual will apply to all other employees. So the bishop wanted that to be very clear. Secondly, sometimes the diocese itself changes its own internal policies for the diocese. There is an understanding throughout all of this process that the diocese still retains that power to change, amend, augment some of its policies. Just think of how safe environment has changed over the years to where it is now from when it first started. And then thirdly, getting attacked by the plant up here. Thirdly, the pastor may decide to change a policy at a certain moment in time for good reason. The pastor still retains that authority to do that, of course, but we ask that we always be informed if that change has occurred. Now, this is in the bishop's letter accompanying everything here. The other thing in the bishop's letter to keep you informed on is that he has set the date of October 1st, when the vicariate 5th anniversary occurs. He has set that as the date that every parish should have its manual adopted by them. That's why one of the other reasons why we think that a June 30th date will really be helpful in moving that process along so that every parish by October 1st can be able to meet the bishop's wishes on that. I think that the way we'll conclude this first part is just to say that this has been a great experience for both Rita and me, and certainly with everyone who has participated. And we really can see the church kind of coming alive as we address some of these issues that haven't really been addressed in many places for many years. Now, with that, we are going to start walking through the template. And this is probably where you start. We have these, just so you're aware, there is a detailed set of directions that Rita said. They're really the step-by-step process of doing that. We're really going to probably start with the guide, the table of contents, which is the second document in that handout.
Okay. You will look at the page that's numbered Roman numeral 6, and it says Guide Table of Contents. We have placed the mandatory provisions in bold. I presume you heard the first part about the mandatory provisions in bold. So if you see a provision that is written in bold, that's where we're suggesting to you that you need to adopt it because it is Pennsylvania law. Or it might be diocesan policy that's long-standing, and we're suggesting that you must also adopt that. There might be sections in the employee benefits that are controlled by documents that the parish doesn't control, and therefore you need to follow the way we have set this forth. So if it is in bold, you don't make a decision, you simply say, okay, that's it, we're putting that part of the manual in, we'll adopt that part of the template. But now, the provisions that are in regular type are provisions that are recommended by us, but not necessarily mandatory. So you have a choice as to whether you'll accept that or you'll reject that. Provisions that are in italics are the important part also, because that's where you actually make a decision as to what fits best for your parish practices. We know that in the pastoral center, when we developed our manual, it was quite easy to know what holy days we had off and what national holidays we had off, because the pastoral center would be closed on those days as there are no liturgical events taking place in the pastoral center. So, of course, all the staff has off on Christmas Eve, all the staff has off on Easter Monday, those kinds of things. But of course, in a parish, that's not necessarily the case, because Christmas Eve, you have liturgies at 4 o'clock, you might have liturgies at 6, you have them at midnight or 10. There are many things that go on that would require some members of your staff to be on board, to be at their jobs. So therefore, those are places in the manual where you personally make the decisions. Okay, so now as we walk through the table of contents, the bishop has indicated that this is a very important project to him, so therefore we've made his letter to all of the employees as a mandatory part of this document. It sets the tone. It sets why the bishop is suggesting that we do this at a certain time in history in the diocese, and why it's mandatory that it be done by October the 1st. The preamble is also a mandatory portion of this manual because it indicates the theology behind why we have set this manual the way we have. We're grateful to Father Frank Almeida for producing for us the preamble in light of Catholic social teaching. The next parts are the provisions by which you need to, in which you need to make a decision. You need to determine if you're putting in a history of the parish. Now, that's a very helpful item to include. And you may say, well, it's just one more step, and I don't really want to go through having to do that. However, when people come from other parishes and assume employment at your parish, or when the new pastor comes, it's really nice to have all of that laid out in the parish personnel manual, because it will tell that person what to expect. It will give an indication to that person of what to expect. There's then introductory material and pastoral staff of the parish. That's discretionary to list a chart of who the employees are in the parish. Now, that's obviously going to be changeable. As employees change, you're going to need to go back into the system and change that. Very important is the acknowledgement of receipt by the employee of the manual. That's to ward off, now I'm putting on the legal hat, that's to ward off a person indicating that they did not know that they were in breach of a parish personnel policy. So if they sign off on the manual, they're presumed to know what is contained in the manual. So that's purely defensive in nature. Okay, now the first big section, section 1.0, you'll see that many of the things are required. And those are basically to help you. Those are the definitions of full-time, part-time, telling you that there are conflicts of interest, that employees need to sign off on a conflicts of interest statement, that employees need to behave in accord with church teachings. Now, all of those are not discretionary. They're mandatory, so you can simply adopt those as you move through. But now certain relevant dates, as you get down to 1.8, relevant dates, that's discretionary. You have to determine what you're going to put there. And employment of relatives, you have to make a policy. You have to determine, are you going to allow a husband and wife to work at the parish plant? Are you going to allow a mother, daughter, father, son? Sometimes there are inherent conflicts in doing that, but you have to make the pastoral decision as to whether that's appropriate for the circumstances in your parish. As you move along, you'll see verification of employment, verification of references. Now, the verification of employment eligibility, that's something that's required by the Immigration and Naturalization Service of the U.S. government, so that's not something that we have a choice about. So you just need to follow those directions step by step. Then recommended best practices, we come to substance abuse whistleblower policy. It's recommended, of course, that you have some kind of a substance abuse policy, but you need to determine whether this is what you wish to do. As we move through working conditions, you'll see that a lot of that, that's up to you, that you're able to determine that, the snow days, the schedule of office hours, mandatory that you give lunch periods, but when they are is going to be discretionary at the parish level, but you have to give work breaks. Dress code, we recommend you have a dress code, of course. And we are telling you that it's mandatory about having a smoke-free facility. Many of our communities require that. It's not a discretion, it's not a choice that we have. Okay, job performance, job description. You'll note that in the back of the manual, in the back of the template, we've provided you with sample job descriptions of common positions in a parish. Now, it might be one size fits all. This is not going to be fitting for your particular parish, but it might be fitting if you had a lot of employees and you were able to pick and choose the job descriptions for various members of your staff. But if you have a staff of 2 and they need to do everything in the parish, there's not going to be a job description that covers doing everything in the parish. So you're going to have to create that on your own. However, these should give you some bit of guidance. You'll see that there's a lot of discretion with absence, tardiness, appointments for doctor's visits. You need to decide that. You in the parish can make those kinds of decisions. Medical disability-related matters, those are, certain things are governed by federal and state law, so they're non-discretionary, but a lot of the other ones, you make the choice, or it's a best practice, we're recommending that you do it this way. Section number 4, you see a whole lot of bold. Those are sections that are laid out for you. Those are telling you that these are all governed by statute, by law, so you need to follow these. However, you can determine vacations, personal leaves of absence, return to work, bereavement leave. Those are up to you to say this is appropriate or this is not appropriate. Termination of employment, unemployment compensation, severance pay, that's non-discretionary, but the rest of the materials you have to make a decision in the parish. Administration, a lot of that is non-discretionary. Equal employment opportunity, policy against discrimination. But then you get into certain kinds of materials that you can decide on your own. Information about an employment record sought by a third party. You need to make that decision on your own to say, I will release or I won't release. Then we've provided for you a section on volunteers, and the section on volunteers is truly not discretionary simply because it's going to provide the safe environment kinds of things that you need to be aware of. And you need to be aware that your volunteers are not your employees. Volunteers are in here for your guidance and for what you need to know about volunteers, but this manual is not for volunteers. It's for your paid staff, but your volunteers are bound by, you're bound to follow the direction on what you're required to do for the volunteers. Then there's a series of appendices, and we hope that in those appendices we provide for you all in one place the different materials that you typically would need and that you maybe don't have to call downtown for. Example, it has extensive section on benefits, it has work-related injuries, workers' comp, and it has guidelines for implementation, Cardinals Clause, those kinds of things. And then, as I said to you, sample job descriptions and also sample contracts for certain ministries if you choose to use those. Okay. Then there's the decision-making chart, the decision-making tree, which we will walk through in a little more care. Do you want to pick up some of that? Okay.
Just a comment or two on what Rita just went through very, very quickly. We've attempted in this manual, in the beginning of every section, to also alert you what was mandatory because it's required by law or diocesan policy, what is best practice, and what is something for which you have to provide information. So that's at the beginning of every section, just so you can understand what the thought is behind this template. Following each section is the description of the why. It gives you a little bit of explanation why this is structured the way it is. It will hopefully provide with the citation to the law. It might provide you, though, with explanation of how it applies in practice. So while this is enormous in terms of content, I don't disagree. We don't disagree. Some of these sections are there to help you at least understand a little bit why we have it there. And I point particularly to the volunteers. I point particularly to the volunteer section under Section 7. There's also a section through in the manual that deals with employment of minors. You know, that's something we don't really even think much about at a parish level. Oh, we'll have that little 16-year-old boy come and mow the lawn. Oh, you know, you're paying him something for it, but there are laws that govern these things. So we're kind of giving a little bit of explanation along the way why we have to have a little sensitivity to a number of these provisions. So with the very quick review we've just given you of the required, the best practices, and the matters for which you need to fill in the blank. Now we're going to look at the decision-making chart. And the decision-making chart is accompanied by something we did not hand out to you, which is something you got on the internet, and it looks like this, okay? And this is kind of what we call the cheat sheet. Just pull this thing out. It has a little bit of explanation of each chapter and verse, not really chapter and verse, chapter and subsection, and down the left-hand side, and then whether it's required by law, diocesan policy, a best practice, or fill in the blank. And then a little explanation on the right-hand side. This is for ease in understanding what you have to do. Now, we didn't copy this and submit this to you, or copy this for today, but this is really a guide, and it is designed to be a helpful guide as you walk through each of the sections, so you can identify, okay, for sections 1.1 through 1.3, I got to do it. You know, we're not going to argue about this. I got to do it. It's just implementing it. But maybe for section, a couple sections a little bit later, yeah, let's talk about it, kind of thing. So this is a very, hopefully, a helpful guide to you in the processing through of this. As Rita said, and we'll just go through this and then we'll open it up for questions. There are 4 pieces of paper that will guide you in exactly the decisions you need to make. And it looks like this chart. This is the chart. If you choose to have assistance by the diocese, our wonderful Chris, these are the documents you send back to her. If you have questions, yes, call Rita or me, but this is what she will then use to create the template for you, for your parish, designed for your particular circumstances. So these are important, these 4 pages. The first 2 pages are the recommended best practices, and then there's you use that little chart I just told you to explain each of the subsections. The next 2 pages, after we get through these, are the required documents, and again, information that you'll need to send in to us or at least put into your manual. So we certainly anticipate you will have questions, and we are going to make ourselves available to answer those questions. But this is just the overview of the how to do this. As far as the substance, those will be individual questions that each one of us will deal with.
And when you look at the chart that Maureen just showed you, the requirements and best practices, it really does give you the rationale as to why we think you ought to do what we're suggesting, or why we think that there's a discretionary area, and then we're saying to you, you can choose. Do you want the hire date of the employee to be the first date that the employee walked onto the premises and you gave them the job, or do you want it to be a different date? And of course, that's all relevant. You may say, well, who cares about that? It's very relevant for things like retirement benefits, sick days, health benefits. So there's a rationale behind what we've done. We may certainly have not included something that's germane to your particular parish, and we'll do our best to work with you on what could be useful for your particular parish. We try to think of all situations that would be applicable, but of course that's basically impossible. So we did the best we could. And we hope that with this manual, you'll be able to incorporate what you have already in practice and then put it into some kind of formal application.
One matter we have not addressed is that as I look across the room, I'm informed many of you have personnel manuals. And some of the manuals are in great shape. Some of them are not as much in great shape, meaning that they're only addressing maybe 1 or 2 issues as opposed to the broader scope that we're giving to this manual. It is certainly a resource. It's a decision by the pastor whether you just amend your current manual or you go with this template. I think I reflect Rita, and I certainly reflect my opinion, that it's probably going to be easier to use the template and then to dovetail what you currently have into the template, because then there is a common way that we can assist you in knowing where other provisions of the manual might address an issue. But if you are excuse me, one of the parishes that already has a manual, we will work closely with you in making sure that the relevant portions of that manual get captured in the template.
One more point on the decision-making chart, just so that it's clear to you, on page 3 of 4 of the decision-making chart, when you get to the appendices, and this is about employee benefits, certain benefits that are given in the pastoral center of the diocese may not be applicable in each particular parish relative to the family of an employee. And so you need to carefully make your decisions when you're looking at page 3 of 4, group health coverage. You have to indicate if it's available to the employee only, the employee and spouse, or the employee and family. And obviously, for those of you that are business managers in the room, you know the implications of making the benefits applicable family-wise, but of course, we're church. And so you need to weigh what you do with the benefits that you're given and the decisions that you make. Example, group dental coverage. You need to determine, A, if you'll pay for it, for whom you will pay for it, or whether you will simply make it available. As an example, in the pastoral center, I have the availability to purchase it. And I could purchase it for myself, I could purchase it for my husband, I could purchase it for any child that is, I don't know if it's the 26 or the 21 for the dental, I'm not really sure, but I have the ability to purchase it, but the diocese does not pay anything toward it. It simply makes it available at a group rate. Same is not true for healthcare. Any employee that works 30 hours must be given healthcare benefits. Now, it does, and then those healthcare benefits apply also if a dependent child is under the age of 26. But you need to make the decision as to whether you're giving the benefits not only for your employee, but for your employee's wife or husband, or for children that are under the age of 26. Same thing for vision, same thing for various other kinds of benefits that might be set forth on those pages. We're not telling you that you have to do it. We're telling you you need to make a decision so that it's clear, because it obviously has a huge financial impact for you when you make that kind of decision. Okay, questions? Yeah? Now the question, in case you didn't hear it, is can some of the employees be grandfathered so that you make the decision saying everyone henceforth shall have this kind of coverage, but everyone that's here gets this benefit? Sure, you can do that. And sure, it is as changeable as the pastor who walks in the door for whom the bishop makes a new assignment and puts Father X where Father Y was. Except, of course, yes, Maureen's reminding me, except for those provisions that are mandatory by law or are diocesan policy. But those that were discretionary to the pastor, that simply is what that means, discretionary to the pastor. So it will depend on who's there. It probably will not. I know that the new union contract is about to be negotiated, coming up. And these are standard benefits, and the union has standard benefits. But there's not a chance that this aligns with things such as sick days. You know, for those of you that have schools, you know that banked sick days are a large liability that you carry for your school employees. So this policy grants sick days. Of course, it says everyone's entitled to a sick day, but you have to determine it. How many sick days are you giving? Are you allowing them to carry on? Are you capping them? We're suggesting to you, because this is the way our policy works in town, we're giving you that suggestion. We've capped it at 60 days of accumulated sick days because of the fact that after 60 work days, the person is able to be eligible for long-term disability. We in the diocese do not have a policy for short-term disability, and therefore neither would the parish have such a policy, because you probably would not have purchased it on your own. It's a very costly policy, which is why we don't have it as a benefit for us. However, the sick days were a way to alleviate or compensate for the fact that we didn't have that kind of policy. But 60 days ought to cover it. But to specifically answer your question, Father, the timing is going to be different because the school employees don't work for 2 months of the summer. They have this unfettered amount of sick days. No, this is not applicable to the school employees, they're going to be governed either by the new contract that you all, that the 31, do we have 31 schools that are union schools, or 30? That we 61 schools are in question. 30 or 31 of you will work after the contract is negotiated to probably employ or incorporate some of those provisions into the handbook and newly revise a handbook, and you're therefore a handbook school. Those of you that are union schools, you'll be subject to whatever is negotiated with the union contract. So no, this will not apply to your school people. This will not apply to them. And we don't have that ability. You know, a question that we faced very early on in the priests, in the Presbyteral Council was, can't we have a policy that's across the board applicable to everyone? No, you can't. You can have one that's applicable to everyone else but the teachers, because the teachers have the benefit of the union contract and also the handbook. So so we're in the situation that we're in. And oh, you all know the handbooks schools. Anyone have a question as to what those are? No, they all know. Okay, y'all know. The definition, let me look at the table of contents to see where full and part-time. Okay, that's 1.6 A and C. So we'll look it up. Full-time is an employee regularly scheduled to work 40 hours per week in any one calendar year. That's on page 3. And a part-time employee is one whose job is not continuous and or who works less than 1,000 hours per calendar year. So the 1,000 hours per calendar year is your cutoff for part-time. However, 30 hours is far more than 1,000 hours. I'd have to do the calculation in my head, but it's 2,050. Thank you, Skip Perry. Yeah, it doesn't have to take them. And in the old contracts, just note that in the old contracts, there used to be a clause in the contract that said, in lieu of my taking these benefits, I will receive the sum of $600, $800, $1,000, whatever it is that you might have wanted to put in there. You can negotiate that in. There's no problem with putting something like that in if you choose to. It does not appear in the contracts that you have an example of, because it's presumed that most people would take the health care. But of course, there would be situations where they would be covered by their spouse by a for-profit corporation and then wouldn't need to take the health care from us. So you may decide to do that. I mean, some companies do that. Some companies provide $600 or $1,000.
And many do not. You know, there's a benefit here. If you want the benefit, you can take the benefit. But there is oftentimes, and be aware that this is more and more the situation, there will be a request of you to disclose whether you are already covered by another plan. And then the secondary plan, like the diocese or the parish, wouldn't cover. Now, I'm not saying that's our position. I'm just saying be aware that other places might also be asking that of the spouses of the employees. So I don't know, the compensation is as much now. What is the practice as it used to be? So many people at the diocese, for example, don't need the benefit, so they don't take the benefit, but they don't get compensated at all for not taking the benefit. This employment policy covers all the employees at the parish level except for those under the contract called the labor contract, the handbook contract, or if you happen to have a separate contract for one of your ministers, okay, or one of the contracts back there. But for everybody else, you are an employee at will. Most employees will be an employee at will. This personnel manual covers all of them. Now, the contract can't be less than what's in the template. Usually a contract provides more benefits. But in many of the cases we've seen at parishes, they don't have any contracts. They just are all employees at will. I will also say something else about the the parish, the contracts, they have been now, these are basically now employment-related contracts. They don't deal with the certification that these contracts used to deal with. Certification is another issue that is under another part of the diocese, but these contracts now don't apply to that.
And also in these contracts, it indicates that the parish agrees so long as the blank minister remains an employee in good standing and in compliance with the terms thereof, the parish shall provide benefits as set forth in the parish personnel manual for this parish. So we're tying the contract into the parish personnel manual. The only thing that the contract will serve for, aside from the benefits, which are already stipulated, is going to be the salary, whether they're working in monthly, like 12 months or 10 months, and also it guarantees them that they are employed for the period of the terms of the contract, which are generally 1 year. That doesn't mean you have to keep the employee for 1 year. However, you would be financially obligated for the terms of the contract. That might be a reason why you say, why would I want to do a contract? Because that ties me up for an entire year with this employee. But the converse of not having a contract is that if you are sued for some reason by this particular employee, you have no limitation to your liability, so it's open. Whereas if you're sued by the employee and you have a contract, you know that the terms of the contract limit your liability. So you're not looking at going into court with probably an $80,000 or a $100,000 liability around your neck. You know that the liability is simply whatever the term of the contract is that person didn't work. So if you say this isn't working after a 6-month period of time, your liability is limited to the 6-month period of time in that salary. So that's a half a year's salary. And, in lieu of going to court, the employee might accept 3 months, might accept a severance of, 3 to 4 months, might accept something that's far less than the actual terms of the contract. But you would be obligated on the contract, but at the same time, it does frame your liability. So I'm a supporter of a contract to the extent that it does limit your liability to that extent.
And we go back and forth on that sometimes. One of the things also, just to kind of thread in there, is that people have to perform their job. And if they're not performing their job, there has to be tangible evidence that the employee knows he or she is not performing the job, and that you have done the 2 or 3 steps that have a rehabilitative segment to it before that ultimate, hey, I don't think this is going to work, it's time to move on. So job performance appraisals, evaluations, all those things are important. They're so difficult to do, but they both support you and the employee. And so one can't walk in one day and say you're fired and expect not to hear from a lawyer. That's going to happen, most likely. But on the other hand, if there has been some sense of progressive, I don't even want to use the word discipline, but progressive attempts to rehabilitate, and it just hasn't worked, everyone kind of knows that the clock is ticking. And, the bona fides are going to be much more on your side if you've taken those kinds of steps. Now, anybody can sue. So it's not like you're not going to be sued. On the other hand, it's how it looks when you do take the case to court. And that's what, we go back and forth on, you can limit your liability if you have a contract because it's only for a certain amount of months or a year. On the other hand, that's not to say that if you don't have a contract, you still can win in court.
Sure. And it just occurred to me that Maureen mentioned job performance evaluations and the need for a tool. Pastors have asked for a tool. Some of you may already have your own job performance reviews that you conduct with your employees, and others may not. We have been in everything in the diocese is a process, a consultative process, and we have been in a long consultative process about the tool that we will implement at the diocese for performance review. And we believe it's a good tool. We are trying it out with a pilot group in March, and then introducing it in March, trying it out in the last quarter of the fiscal year, so April, May, June. And then it would be applicable to the rest of the employees starting in the new fiscal year, July 1. So as soon as we work out the bugs, we don't want to send you a document that we haven't tried out yet. We know that the manual works because we've had it in place in September of 2011 in a related form. And so we're comfortable in saying to you, yes, this will work for you. The tool, the evaluative tool, we will know if it works in June. And if it works, we will send it to you. We will send it to you with its corrections and with its, the hints about, what we would suggest that you change in a parish level versus a diocesan level. And it may be too complicated for a parish. It may be too extensive, but then again, it may be just right. It depends on size, it depends on circumstances. And you can choose to use our tool, or you can choose to use a tool that you find elsewhere. But that is also in the making, and it's coming.
Any other questions? Sorry. No? Oh, okay. Well, I know there's been a lot to digest here today. You all know how to get Rita and me. We're simply on the diocesan email, R. Joyce and M. Lally Greene. So you can get to us and Chris Radcliffe. Certainly, it's been our privilege to be here today with you, and we thank you for your most kind attention and look forward to working with you as we get to that next step in our Church Alive. So thank you all.